Hmm. Good afternoon, Reverend Will and Reverend Christy, back with you this afternoon as we do this week's devotion. Listen to this prayer from the Iroquois Nation. Now is the season of growing things. Now we give thanks to our Creator, the great ruler, the great life, the great Spirit. Now he listens to the words of the people here assembled. We give thanks for the return of the planting season. We give thanks again that we are permitted to take part in this ceremony. We give thanks for the earth, our mother, from whose breast all things grow. We give thanks to him for the seed to give back to our mother. We give thanks for rivers and waters that flow, for herbs and plants and all fruit-bearing trees and bushes that grow. We give thanks that our supporters of life, corn, beans, and squash, fail us not, that famine is not permitted to enter our lodge doors. Adapted from an Iroquois prayer. I just have to give a shout out to David Henry, who gave me this book, God Has No Religion, this collection of prayers that I've been using during this season when we've been meeting online. Thanks for that book, Reverend Dave Henry.
Yes.
So you had a great sermon Sunday on living with abundance, and I've been thinking a bit about it, especially as we live isolated. We don't always get to see our own, let alone other people's abundance. Sometimes the best we get is Alice Gibbons joining our Wednesday afternoon social hour on Zoom for the first time.
Yeah, yeah. It's wonderful energy from her. And yet then we also, and this happened as we were talking about what we would say today, I mean, also discovering these well springs of abundance and generosity in the lives of other people that we're becoming aware of through the media. And one of the things that struck me as you were reading the opening prayer is the words related to famine and this sense, may there not be famine. May we be supported by the earth, and may there be an abundance in terms of what's generated by the earth, in terms of what nurtures us and blesses us. And what it did is it reminded me of a story that maybe you've heard, and I'm sure many other people listening have heard too, of the story of the Native Americans who 170 years ago heard about the Irish potato famine and contributed money 170 years ago. And that Native American tribe had just gone through the Trail of Tears. So that tribe had experienced incredible agony and suffering themselves. And it was from that place of deep compassion and that empathy, that abundance of empathy, that they offered money to the Irish. And then come forward 170 years where the Navajo Nation, a different Native American tribe, but is now struggling with COVID-19, and they set up a GoFundMe page asking for support because one of the reasons they're suffering so much is because they don't have access to clean water. They're living in very, very small spaces, and so social distancing is difficult. And they created this GoFundMe page to ask people to support them to get access to more water and things like that. And one of the sources of primary support came from the Irish people who remembered the gift from 170 years ago. And I found that really moving.
I think I first heard of that story when I was in Ireland last year.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Did you see, because they evidently have built a memorial, that there's actually a physical place in Ireland that honors.
That's what I was reading, and I can't remember if it was Kildare or somewhere else where there was some recognition and remembrance of the Native American tribes who reached out because they had basically been colonized by the same British.
Interesting. Yeah. But that, I think from what I read too, that the creation of this sculpture in Ireland had reawakened the memory in a lot of the people in Ireland. So it's almost like a fresh memory. And when they heard about the suffering of the Navajo Nation, there were many people evidently moved to offer financial support. And so that abundance can happen cross generation too. I mean, the memory of generosity, I think, is just very powerful. And tying back to last week when we talked about that, the whole sense of we as individuals being the center of our world, and the alternative image for that being that we're part of this larger circle of the web of life, and that one of the things that ties us into this circle is the memory of our ancestors' generosity. I just think that that's very, very beautiful.
Where else do you see abundance in life?
Well, it was interesting. I came up with a list. This is just part of before I prepared last week to preach. And these were abundance in terms of too much. So abundance, I think, can be both a positive thing and a negative thing. But just some of these words: overbuy, overeat, overextend, overcommit, overreact, overindulge, overdose, overwrought, overthrow, overtake. So the sense of abundance can actually be oppressive and negative, as well as the life-giving source. And that's, Jesus uses abundance in terms of something that is overflowing and more than enough in terms of what sustains us and nurtures us.
The panic buying of toilet paper.
Exactly. Exactly. Overbuying.
Then puts other people into scarcity.
Exactly. And how I think we're really trying to, well, go ahead.
It's the little things in life that count.
Yeah. It's true. It's true. But I think for the challenge of us in some ways during the pandemic is to navigate between abundance and scarcity, and find our way to have enough so that what we have is available not just to ourselves but to other people too.
Maybe even eat down some of the extra food that we've filled our cupboards with that we didn't have actual plans for, but is there for a rainy day.
Yeah, so that there's more available for other people.
Or to get you 1 or 2 more days beyond your shop, or to your next shopping day if you're trying to shop once a week.
Yeah. And I also think being attuned to and aware of the fact that scarcity is a real challenge in many people's lives, and just becoming more attuned to that too, that there are people who are really suffering now because of financial scarcity. They don't have access to health care. They don't have access to affordable housing.
Well, one of the big shifts that's occurred in the business world over the last 20 or 30 years is just-in-time inventorying, and creating a supply chain that you can rely on, but bringing in different parts that might be needed to be assembled for one product to be made. More and more big businesses are creating these just-in-time supply chains that allow them to get all of the different parts necessary for whatever product they're making, but all it takes is one of those supply chains to not be able to participate in that system for them not to be able to do the product, and lead to scarcity as well.
And that's what's happening with the testing, right? That all of the components necessary in the supply chain are not available, partly because some of them come from China, so that we're really realizing the consequence of that, which works beautifully if all of the pieces of the supply chain are available and functioning and arriving when they're supposed to, but if they're not.
And your delivery systems are working.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so scarcity results from that. And that's had a huge impact on how we've been able to respond or not respond to the virus.
It makes you consider what really matters and how well we take care of our neighbors.
Yeah.
Especially in times of scarcity. We just finished our Wednesday afternoon social hour, and we talked about how many people are in Contra Costa in the system right now, and I think we talked about, what was it here? 985 total cases in Contra Costa, 16,150 people have been tested, 29 deaths, but only 19 people in hospitals. So just to preserve that capacity, that abundance of capacity in a hospital, we have to do so much work to try to decrease the infections, but also we have to preserve other parts of the hospital, not do the elected surgeries, which actually help supply the funding necessary to keep hospitals open in order for there to be capacity in case more people get infected. So even that plays into whether or not there will be a hospital bed if any of us get infected ourselves, right?
Right. So creating the sense of abundance in terms of hospital beds is actually creating scarcity in terms of financial resources for hospitals.
And people that do have needs and health needs like shoulders and knees replaced and hips replaced, putting that on the back burner for now.
Right, out of an abundance of caution. Again, going back to that term that's been used, was used especially at the beginning, that the whole mindset in terms of the staying at home order was around an abundance of caution. To really try and keep the numbers down.
That's right. I wonder if we're getting any better at not wasting food.
I hope so.
You know, I mean, when they were saying a year ago that we waste almost 40% of all of the food in our culture, well, there are other billions of people in the world that don't get enough food. We know that that's a distribution problem, but we also know that just having that abundance ready for us for the purchasing at any given time means that there's not going to be enough in other parts of the world if it's not being moved there. So even just thinking about where our food comes from and those people that are living with food insecurity versus our culture who get so much food put into our own supermarkets that we know that up to 40% goes to waste. I imagine we're probably doing better now because we're at home. We're mostly cooking our own meals rather than eating as much out or eating near our work for lunches. So maybe we're doing better with that.
Let's hope so. Yeah. And again, that hopefully our awareness is being raised too of how much is available to us and the privilege that comes with that and the greed that comes with that and the kind of the nonchalance about wasting. Like there's not an urgency to preserve food or to really appreciate what we have, that there's almost like a sloppiness around how we care for our food.
Yeah, one of the things we talked about after worship Sunday was home communion. And we had home communion and just the different way that we experience it as UCCers and Presbyterians, because we have a theology that lends itself to allow us to be able to do home communion, whereas other traditions have theological barriers or bishops that say a priest has to actually be present to bless the actual elements before it can be distributed to other folks. So many Lutherans and Catholics may be feeling a scarcity of the ability to participate in what for them is weekly Eucharist or communion, but for us, we do on the first Sunday. We're able to do that together, and because of our understanding of the omnipresence of God, we're able to not have any polity issues around whether or not we can share home communion. But even those little differences can be a trigger for whether or not we're living in a world of religious and spiritual scarcity or not.
Yeah. Well, and even within the Catholic tradition, oftentimes Mass is daily for some people. So again, the abundance available within that tradition, that often you can go to a Catholic church any day of the week and sometimes at different times of the day, in the morning or the evening, and receive the Eucharist. And now it's much harder, where we who do it once a month, which would be seen as scarcity within a Catholic tradition, have
and
this
not enough.
We have more than enough because anybody in their own home can use their own bread, their own juice, their own wine. And we've even said, you did that wonderful imagining of even doing it with invisible elements. So we have total freedom, which has led to incredible abundance, even though our tradition has us only doing communion once a month. So it's fascinating.
Well, back 500 years ago, many people were superstitious around the Eucharist, right? And it's one of the places where we're still the most divided as Christians, is our theology around the presence of Christ at the Eucharistic table.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah. And I'm just so pleased that we are able, within our context and within our traditions, to really see the presence of Christ from that Celtic spirituality perspective, which is infused within our own hearts, between us and the world around us, and that the sacraments become a way to manifest that and to acknowledge that and to symbolically embody that. But that there's a universal presence that's alive in the universe. That for me is just so freeing.
And yet we only choose to do communion once a month.
Yeah, go figure.
And you would think, based on our spiritual heritage, we might actually go back and reclaim what John Calvin said, that every Lord's Day we should be having communion, so at least once a week. But he fought it was actually the city council in Geneva that kept him from doing it every week, because many of the people had become superstitious around the communion table.
Fascinating, yeah. But then in some ways we could do it every day. We could really allow ourselves to appreciate the food that we eat as a gift.
And to eat mindfully and eat sacramentally.
Yes.
Giving thanks for the life of the plants and animals that are nourishing us, and giving thanks to them and recognizing them as a part of the sacrifice necessary for us to survive.
Beautifully.
That's a different way of being in relationship with the natural world as well, isn't it?
It's really true, yeah. And then being aware that there are limits too, that in the midst of that sense of gratitude and awareness of our interrelatedness, to be aware that there are limits to what we can choose to consume, so that others can consume also, so that we can share the resources in a way that I think we're sometimes oblivious to now, is we just consume as much as we want and throw away as much as we want and aren't really affected by that. But that if there were more mindfulness, I think we would be more able to understand the ways that we need to share.
Well, there is a movement of people that are going vegetarian or vegan for the very purpose of not only not eating animals, but also to change their relationship with the animal world, and to recognize that we can get all the protein that we need from plant sources, and that's actually how the animals themselves get it. But we've become so accustomed to eating different animals that for some folks it would feel like scarcity if they weren't allowed to eat animals, and yet other folks are choosing it as a way of reordering their own life and recognizing that there's enough for everyone to eat if we eat more like people in India do with less meat, so that all of the vegetarian food that we do create gives us enough of the calories and proteins necessary to survive as humans.
And it's very possible. I mean, a lot of people are doing that already, and are healthy and energetic and attuned to their lives and other lives in a very beautiful way.
But some are doing it specifically to make sure that there's enough abundance for everyone and for all the animals as well, especially as we start to crowd out the animals. And if there's anything coronavirus has taught us, is that our encroachment on the places of wild living things can have unintended consequences for our own health.
Yeah. Which is the mega awareness, I think. Oh, look at that! It's coming together.
Yeah, I've got another rainbow lay.
That's really, really beautiful. Yeah. It reminds me, this is kind of a tangent, but when you call that a rainbow lay, it reminds me of another experience of abundance in Hawaii, of making leis out of flowers, and how there were just mounds and mounds and mounds and mounds of flowers. I'd never seen so many flowers in one place before, and just a group of people working around a table to make leis, and just the abundance that you experience with the lei of flowers and with what you're doing. I mean, the abundance of acceptance, right, is what ties into that. To that lei, it becomes a symbol, right, of open-heartedness, of abundant love, of unconditional love, of the circle being inclusive.
That love doesn't always have to look the same way to be love or to be recognized as such. Yeah.
Very true.
Abundance and scarcity, it's all around us, and what we choose to focus on can sometimes be the most telling aspect of life.
And Jesus calls us to abundance. I mean, that famous passage. Yeah.
And sharing.
Yes. And to understand that abundance is linked to sharing. I mean, I think that's part of the wisdom of Jesus, that he calls us to this life that we may live abundantly. And that means, I think, from a faith perspective, that we live into this sharing, this compassion, this empathy that allows us to know that what we experience as abundance is really meant to be given to other people.
And to be used for all of our well-being.
Yes.
And that we belong to each other, as Mother Teresa said.
And that feels like a perfect place to end.
Thanks so much. It's good to catch up again. This next Sunday we'll be looking at trouble. No trouble in our hearts Sunday, and we'll be encouraged by Jesus' words to continue to live with and for each other.
And we'll celebrate Mother's Day in the midst of
Mother's Day.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. See you Sunday.
See you then. Be well.
Okay. Bye-bye.